Leith Van Onselen is the chief economist of the MB Fund and MB Super. He's co-founder of Macro Business. Leith and I have been known to have conversations on a regular basis. This is a bit different, this one. This is an extra piece. Morning, Leith. How are you?
There you go, Mike. How are you?
Good, thank you. You're going to talk about China and how it's conning the world on net zero. Explain.
Yeah, mate, this is an interesting one. It might be a little bit controversial, but I think we can all sort of relate to it. So, as we all know, residents of the Western world are being told that we must stop burning fossil fuels like coal and gas, etc., to stop so-called dangerous climate change. Now, I think we can all agree we'd love to live in a cleaner world. And, you know, if you can reduce pollution, that's a good thing. But the problem with these policies is that they're effectively, you know, forcing manufacturing industries across the Western world. So Australia is one of them, but also, you know, right across Europe, etc., to basically shrink because we're shutting down cheap, reliable baseload power, stuff that's powered electricity grids for generation and giving us cheap power. We're shutting those down, and it's basically forcing up our energy costs. And what it's done is actually contributing to the structural decline in our manufacturing sectors. So in Australia, our manufacturing sector is the smallest in the advanced world. It's shrunk to about 5% of our national GDP, or national economic output, which is deplorable. But, you know, places like Germany, the United Kingdom, etc., they're also having their manufacturing sectors shrink at an alarming pace, principally because of higher energy costs and the pursuit of net zero, etc. They've got less reliable energy grids, the cost of energy is going up, etc., while they, you know, phase out their old-fashioned, reliable fossil fuel-based power and try to go to this renewable stuff. Now, I argue that China is the largest beneficiary of the West's net zero policies, and it's not abiding by the same rules. And what we're effectively doing is, while we're, reducing our carbon footprints through these sorts of policies and giving us incredibly expensive energy and shutting down our manufacturing and becoming less diversified economies, China is simply expanding its carbon output and expanding its manufacturing sector at our expense. And net, the world's not getting cleaner. We're just shifting the pollution away from us to China, and it's actually less regulated in China. And the world's arguably worse off. Now, so China accounted for 31.5% of the world's carbon emissions in 2023. Now, that's according to Our World in Data, which is a fantastic website which is worth going to. You can basically plot carbon emissions by country, and you can, you know, see where they're all tracking. And what this data showed is, yes, China accounts for nearly one-third of the world's carbon emissions, but its emissions also growing at a near straight line upwards, so near exponentially. And China has accounted for nearly two-thirds of the growth in the world's carbon emissions since 2000. So, you know, effectively China is driving the climate crisis. That's effectively what it says. China is also the largest importer of gas and coal in the world, much of which comes from Australia. So at the same time as Australians are being told that we're not allowed to burn coal and gas, we're actually sending that gas over to China to burn instead of us. And it's also worth pointing out that China is the largest coal producer in the world. So although China imports the most coal in the world, it actually domestically produces more coal than anyone else. And China actually burns 30% more coal than the rest of the world combined. So again, this all gets down to the developed world is cutting back on fossil fuel use while China is going gangbusters. We're shrinking our manufacturing sector through high energy costs. We're giving ourselves cost of living crisis. We're creating inflation, etc. And while we're cutting back, we're sending the same fossil fuels over to China to burn instead of us. And they're just going willy-nilly, ramping up emissions. They're expanding their manufacturing sector at our expense, and we're basically shooting ourselves in the foot. And I think this stat will really, drive it home, Mike. According to Statista, which is another statistical, internet source, the number of coal-fired power plants in China, according to Statista, now it's probably not exactly up to date, but it gives you a ballpark figure, is 1,161 coal-fired electricity power plants.
That's such a stark number. I think that really hits a lot of people, particularly when they're constantly being told that we have to shut down coal-fired power plants in this country.
Mate, absolutely. Australia's got 18, according to Statista. So we got 18 and we're being told we're going to close down power plants. China's got 1,161. So it's like 65 times as many as Australia. And China's actually building 2 new coal-fired power plants every month, or approving 2 new coal-fired power plants. So it's building more and more coal-fired power plants while we're being told we're going to cut back. and China's actually approving new coal mines to dig up coal. So, as I said before, China burns 30% more coal than the rest of the world combined. It's just crazy. And there was a report that came out by a guy called John Kemp, who's from Reuters.
Yeah.
He produced a report a few weeks back, just after Christmas, and he showed that China's electricity generation from thermal coal grew by 51% in the decade to 2024. So again, we've got the same issue here, Mike. The developed world is saying we've got to meet net zero. We've got to cut back our fossil fuel use for the good of the planet. We've got to give ourselves expensive energy costs. We've got to effectively downsize our manufacturing because of those high energy costs. Meanwhile, China is going gangbusters, doing none of these things, burning more coal than the rest of the world combined, like a lot more coal. It's growing its coal use every single year. Its emissions are going up almost in a straight line, going gangbusters. And I implore everyone that goes to Our World in Data to check it out themselves if you don't believe me. Meanwhile, Australia's emissions have not moved for a decade or so. We're effectively down a little bit. The rest of the Western world's emissions have fallen. So what are we doing here? I'd honestly argue, Mike, that the world would be better off. It'd be a cleaner planet, and it'd be a lot more balanced, and we'd be better off if the Western world simply did not export so much fossil fuels to China to burn. They burn it themselves, and they kept their manufacturing at home rather than sending the manufacturing to China instead, because China has looser environmental controls than the West, and its energy efficiency is relatively poor compared to the West. So, effectively what I'm arguing here is that we're basically being hoodwinked on net zero. We're being told that we've got to continually make sacrifices for the good of the planet. We've got to continually cut back on, old reliable power generation, while we, in Australia's case, three-quarters of our East Coast gas gets exported, and almost all of that goes to China. So we're not allowed to. So we're creating gas shortages at home. We've given ourselves expensive energy. Us in Victoria, we've been told we're not allowed to put in new gas appliances or anything, all for net zero, etc. Yeah. But we're sending that same gas to China to burn instead of us, which makes no sense. And the same with coal. Almost all of Australia's East Coast coal goes to China. Some of it goes to Japan as well, but most of it goes to China. And China gets to burn our coal, but we don't get to burn our coal.
None of this has made any sense to me for years, and yet the government maintains a blind eye.
Yeah, it's crazy. As I said, we're being hoodwinked, and we are basically wearing the cost of these policies. Now, as I said, I think we can all agree that we'd like to have a cleaner planet, but this is the whole idea of net zero is completely, impossible or ridiculous if China's not involved.
Indeed.
So if we're going to make sacrifices, China has to make sacrifices. But China's not making sacrifices. They are burning with gay abandon, and they are increasing the world's emissions at the same time as we're being forced to cut back. And as a result, they have an expanding manufacturing industry because they don't abide by the same rules. And Australia and the West have shrinking manufacturing industries. We've given ourselves cost of living crisis, higher inflation, and less diversified economies through these net zero and high energy cost policies.
Makes no sense to me, but I appreciate you coming on the program and painting the picture so clearly. Thanks, Leith.
Yeah, no worries, Mike. Speak to you next time.
Leith Van Onselen. And Leith is Chief Economist at the MB Fund and MB Super and co-founder of Macro Business.